The red heifer sacrifice. This is Pastor Clay Kendall of the Spirit of Prophecy Ministry. I want to thank everybody that has joined in today. It's so good to have you. Let's ask the Father for a word of wisdom on the lesson. Thank you, Father. I want to begin this lesson by making the point that the wording red heifer sacrifice or red heifer ceremony is biblical. But some want to call it the red heifer prophecy, because the Bible draws reference to a temple that the antichrist one day will sit claiming to be God one day. You can find that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, Paul writing, noting that a red heifer isn't mentioned in connection to a temple in the New Testament, but there is reference to it in the Old Testament, Numbers chapter 19. And it is connected to a tabernacle. Okay. Paul mentions the ashes of a red heifer. It says heifer, but he means a red heifer in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 13, but he doesn't connect it to a temple. Now, a little bit on Numbers 19 to get a little bit of background here. Numbers 19 describes where a Levite high priest, it was Eleazar, who takes the blood of a red heifer, which was taken outside the camp and the tabernacle, and sprinkles the blood from the heifer towards the tabernacle. And of course, outside the camp symbolizes the crucifixion, which took place outside Jerusalem on Mount Golgotha. And the number 7 is the number of spiritual completeness or perfection. And thus, that's why the priest sprinkled the blood 7 times toward the temple. Now, the actual purpose of the red heifer sacrifice, which was completely burned and then mixed with water and hyssop and scarlet thread and cedar, was to cleanse the people from those who touched a dead person. It was called the water of separation for the purification of sin. That's in verse 9 of chapter 19, Numbers. For death is sin, correct? Yes. Okay. This sacrifice was symbolic of Jesus Christ's whole purpose to come to earth, be born of Mary, to defeat death on the cross centuries later. You can find that. One reference I like for Christ defeating death was Hebrews chapter 2, verse 4. Now, since the priest sprinkled the blood toward the tabernacle, it dedicated the temple, the tabernacle called at that time as well. Okay. Now, as we covered last week, Christians live by the new covenant of Jesus Christ's blood, where there's no need of any animal sacrifice forever. And I gave those references last Sunday, and there's a lot of them, not hard to find in the New Testament. But believers in Judaism, mostly Jews, but there's some Messianic Jews that do not. But believers in Judaism do not accept, now get this, they do not accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah that came to redeem man, okay? And this is key to really understanding what's going on with the red heifers. Because to the Jews, they can still sacrifice animals once they have a temple to worship their coming Messiah. Now get that. Now I'll speak more about this further into the lesson. But for now, I want to mention a few things that I noticed after listening to a variety of red heifer videos, mainly in regard to the language that evangelists and preachers use when speaking about this topic. And so there's like 3 or 4 or maybe 5 things I want to mention. Most evangelists say and admit that the third temple is connected to the coming of the Antichrist and the tribulation. but they believe the church will be raptured before then. And of course, that's a huge miscalculation on their part, but be that as it may, they can believe whatever they choose to believe. Okay. And number two, I want to bring out that with regard to what I hear from these evangelists and teachers, Christian evangelists, let me make that point about this prophecy, is they always use the words in Jewish tradition, this or that. Or in the Mishnah, it says this or that. Or this is part of the law. Or the Jews say it's part of the law of Moses. But the question is it scriptural just because it comes out of the Mishnah or it's Jewish tradition? Okay, scriptural, but according to who? Teachers of Judaism? I don't think so. You see, Judaism is not Christianity. Get that. Plain and simple. We cannot mix the two beliefs. Without Jesus Christ in our doctrine, there is no mixing. What did Paul teach us? He said a little leaven, that's falsehoods and lies, things outside Christianity, which could be a variety of different religions. But he says a little leaven. He says a little lie here, a little lie there will leaven the whole loaf. In other words, it'll get you off the wrong path if you're not careful. You start making wrong turns, you're not going to make it. Okay? And to be honest, that is what has caused all the confusion on this topic. Too many Christian leaders are mixing their belief, their Christian belief, with Judaism. Or they're certainly influenced by Judaism, that's for sure. I'm talking about the videos that I've been listening to. And that's what I see, and that's what I hear. Okay? By the way, those who haven't heard the word Mishnah, it is an authoritative written embodiment of Jewish oral tradition. Now, that's kind of a long definition or meaning, but it's basically the oral translation of the Torah. It's their translation of the Torah. Okay? But it's the rabbi's interpretation of the Torah, and is that what we're supposed to go by? I don't think so. But my point is, too many Christian leaders take whatever the rabbinic teaches about Bible prophecy, and it's the gospel truth. And that's a very dangerous MO for a lot of reasons. But if I spent more time on that, I would segue too far off. I wouldn't finish my lesson. So I'll have to stop there. But I want to continue and make a few more points about these videos that I've listened to on the Red Heifer. Now, one evangelist said that the Mishnah, speaking of the Mishnah, he says that the Mishnah says that only 9 red heifers have been certified or qualified, predating from the days of Moses to Christ. I mean, that's from the first tabernacle. Moses lived 1400 roughly BC, all the way to Christ. That's a lot of years. And only they had 9 that were sacrificed. And also they say that Jewish tradition, there we go again, Jewish tradition believes that the 10th red heifer would be a revelation of the coming Messiah. That's from them now. It's not in the Bible anywhere, but that's what they say. But the question to me is, which Messiah are they talking about? They're going to usher in the Messiah. You see, there's the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, and a false Messiah coming. And you know what? Most people don't know the difference. And it's very important that we do know the difference. Every Christian should know that we are in the 5th trump. today, 2025. I don't know even the day. I should. I think February 23rd, I believe. Okay. We are in the fifth trump, waiting for the sixth trump, which will usher in the false Messiah, the Antichrist, which obviously happens before the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, comes at the seventh trump. See, that's not hard to figure out. Yet billions of people, yes, billions of people will be deceived in these end days because they listen to wolves in sheep's clothing. I need to do a lesson on that term, wolves in sheep's clothing. That means they have sheep's clothing on. If you look at their clothing and how they dress, and that you can't tell. It looks like a sheep, but they're wolves in those clothing. Okay, I just want to make that point. But these people listen to the wolves in sheep's clothing, these false preachers, and they will not prepare themselves for the great spiritual deception that's going to transpire soon. And it's sad. And of course, that's why we try to spread the gospel, each one of us. That's our job. That's why I do these lessons, quite frankly. Okay, number three, they mention also that information from the most authoritative Jewish rabbis of the Temple Institute, ooh, that they have more than one red heifer certified now, and that they have been looking for a perfect red heifer since the days of Jesus Christ. That's what they say. Can you imagine a statement like that? They have been looking for this, I'll say perfect, this qualified red heifer since the days of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's since the second temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Christ died in 33 AD, just right there, when Titus, the Roman general, destroyed the temple. Okay, so according to the rabbinic, saying that it's taken 2,000 years to find this perfect certified red heifer, they also say, as I've mentioned earlier, that there was only 9 red heifers found from the time of Moses to the second temple. That's almost 1,400 years. Now, let's talk just a little bit about this. I want to talk about what they're claiming historically and logically. They admit they've had 9 in 1,400 years, but none for 2,000 years. Now let's just look at that. If we're going to try to grasp the magnitude of what they're saying, is that since 70 AD, 20 centuries ago, give or take, they never found a certified red heifer until now? By the way, in their claim, they say that only God could make this miracle happen, and they call it a miracle. Of course, this is to gain support from Christian leaders, the word miracle, God, because supposedly God is involved in this because they say so. Okay, so, but how could these Christian leaders, after hearing this, not support this rabbinic red heifer ceremony after hearing that? We finally, after 2,000 years, we have a qualified heifer or 2 or 3. Okay. Well, and again, they use ceremony and prophecy rather than sacrifice. Because listen, they don't want to use the word sacrifice, as I've mentioned, because it lends to Jesus Christ not being the last sacrifice. See, and that would oppose the New Testament doctrine, especially Apostle Paul's teaching on this topic. Thus, the word ceremony sounds better than sacrifice. Nonetheless, let's continue. But history tells us that after 70 AD, the Jewish people and there's a lot to that name, Jewish people. Another rabbit hole I could go down, but I won't finish my lesson. But it's an important topic, nevertheless. But think about it, that the Jewish people since 19 since 70 AD, they've been tossed around from country to country to country, here to there and everywhere as a disorganized, wandering people, which would give them no reason to search for a red heifer. Now remember, they said they haven't been able to find one since Christ. Well, they've been a wandering people with no temple. And with no temple or not being an organized nation, why would they search for a red heifer anyway? What would they do with it? And where would they sacrifice it? They had no temple. Yet they're searching for a red heifer? Perfect one? Why? So it was only since they became a state and a nation in 1948, and by the way, in 1967, the Six-Day War, that's when they captured the Gaza Strip, and I think four other places. I want to say the West Bank, Golden Heights, and part of Jerusalem. I think Eastern Jerusalem. But nonetheless, um, only since then they had their own land. They didn't have a temple, but they had their own land. Could they start searching for a red heifer and build a temple? In fact, let me read what I've learned about the history of this time. They say in what I've read is that the most focused efforts of the rabbis, the most focused efforts came from organizations like the Temple Institute, which began actively searching and breeding, not only actively searching, but breeding candidates since its founding in 1987. So only since 1987 have they been actively searching and breeding candidates. Well, no wonder they never found one since Christ. They weren't actively searching and breeding. Well, I mean, that's quite obvious. Why would they? They didn't have a temple, no land, disorganized. But now it's more believable. Since 1987, they're trying to find these heifers. That's more believable. But they have to sensationalize it, okay, to make it a miracle. Okay. Now they may have talked about the red heifer sacrifice in times past, okay, but they sure didn't apply the most focused efforts, including breeding them, to find the red heifers. Certainly not since the time of Christ. Come on, really? But it's a miracle from God. It must be fate. Well, maybe it's more fake than fate. I'll leave that up to whoever. So since we know and we have found that the Jews haven't been actively searching and breeding red heifer since 70 AD, it's just an outlandish supposed miracle from God to convince. They say it's outlandish, I say it's outlandish, but they say it's a miracle from God to convince and persuade Christian evangelists, preachers, and Christians as a whole to support their efforts via finances, prayers, debates, videos, etc. And there you have pretty much what it's all about. Okay. And if you think about it, if they had found 9 in a much shorter time prior to 70 AD, most likely they would have found at least a dozen or even far more than that if they would have been looking for a qualified heifer since 1970. If they had 9 in 1400 years, they could probably have a lot more than that if they would have been actively searching and breeding. I think I've made my point on that, so I'll let that go. But understand the reason behind what they say. That's my point. Okay. You got to read between the lines what people say. But to finish up, there's so much more I want to bring out. There just isn't enough time. But there are Christians that do oppose this red heifer sacrifice, and God bless them for it. And God bless the Messianic Jews that claim Christ's blood. And you know what? I got to say this. To be sincere and honest about all this stuff, it's hard for me to imagine. It really is. It's hard for me to imagine that Christian evangelists and preachers that believe in the New Testament blood of Christ, that they can teach and support this red heifer sacrifice strictly because they feel spiritually convicted. It's hard for me to get that, knowing what Christ did for them, us. Now, I know some of them, no doubt, do it because perhaps the prestige they receive from the Jewish people, and more importantly, maybe the higher ranking rabbis that they can rub elbows with. And, some of them perhaps are handsomely paid because of it. Who knows? Um, some probably enjoy just receiving a great deal of publicity and accolades from supporting the red heifer sacrifice. But I've always thought there's got to be more to it than that. Because as a Christian, you just know something's up. Christ paid the price. No need for a sacrifice. That's an abomination. That's sacrilegious. And these Christian preachers, let's say they're sincere, there's got to be something more. There's got to be something to it. And you know what? Something that would maybe even help curb their guilt if they would start feeling that way, supporting an antichrist narrative, basically. And, I think I found it. Well, here it is. They believe since the Jews do not accept the blood of Christ for salvation, then the Jews have every right under Mosaic law to sacrifice a red heifer to dedicate the third temple, which will usher in their Messiah. Of course, it would be the second return of Christ, not the first. Okay, Christ came once and he's coming again. But nonetheless, better late than never, so to speak, with the Jews. In fact, I heard one evangelist say that a rabbi told him, he says, "You Christians got the first Messiah and we missed him, but we'll get him on the next return." Now, how crazy is that statement? Talk about a second chance for salvation. And the interesting thing is about these fundamentalist evangelists and preachers, they harp on the fact that no one gets a second chance for salvation. You hear it all the time. Yet they believe the Jews get a second chance. Well, that's okay. That's quite interesting to me. Sounds like a double standard to me. But the problem with this doctrine is that the Messiah of the Jews, the one they're going to be ushering in, will be in fact the false Messiah, the Antichrist, not the true Messiah, Jesus Christ. Now, he is coming again, but the Antichrist comes first. Sixth trump. God made it very simple to figure out prophecy. You don't have to be a genius. Antichrist comes at the sixth trump, and Jesus comes at the seventh. So if you can count to 7, you can figure it out. Yet the way it's going down, the Jews and I'll say deceived Christians both will believe that the next Messiah that comes after the temple is built is the true Christ. They will believe that's their Messiah, the true Christ. But it will be the false Christ. Okay? Because remember, Revelation 13:11 says that Antichrist comes like a lamb. What does that mean? Like Christ, like the lamb that paid the price for all the world. He has two horns like a lamb, but he speaks like a dragon. He's gonna lie to you. In other words, he will look like the true Christ, innocent, kind, beautiful, righteous, but he will speak deceiving words as a flood of lies like a dragon. His outside appearance will look righteous, but his inside will be wretchedly wicked. I'm going to give you a couple of references to read on this. Ezekiel 28:12 through 18, Ezekiel 28:12 through 18, and Revelations chapter 12, 15 and 16, talking about the flood of lies and Antichrist's appearance. So when the Antichrist arrives, he will bring peace to the Middle East. He will also spread peace throughout the whole world. It'll be short-lived peace because it'll be one-worldism built on sand. But most of the world outside God's chosen will fall into his lie of peace. Okay? And Paul told us in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, he said, when they cry peace and safety, when the world cries peace and safety, we finally have peace and safety. That's when destruction will fall upon them, and they shall not escape. Why? Then Christ returns, and they've been had. You see, according to Daniel, the Antichrist will come in peaceably, prosperously, wondrously, with much flattery. No doubt he'll convince the Jews and the Muslims that he is God, and they will embrace and hug one another. At this point, the world will succumb to deception as though he is God. And to believe this great deception, which will happen, that is taking the mark of the beast. You see, God seals his people with truth in the forehead, in the mind. That's Revelation 9. God seals his people with truth in the forehead, but it's in our mind. What's in your forehead? Your brain. We're supposed to use it. And Satan marks his people with deception in the forehead, in the mind. It's not really the forehead, it's in the mind. Okay? Now, it is taught that all the Jews will be saved one day. Even today, they have the spirit of Antichrist. Of course, most evangelists and pastors believe that the Jews are true Israelites of old, which is false, but that's what they believe, who still hold the promises of Abraham. They do believe that. Okay? And again, this is a false narrative based on many factors, but it's outside this particular message, so I've got to wrap up here. But nonetheless, because of this belief, you see that when they are not raptured into heaven, as they think they will be, before the tribulation, they will be here to witness this deception. And they will no doubt accept it as the gospel of truth. Why? Well, when they witness these things unfolding, just as they've been teaching and predicting about the Messiah coming for the Jews, okay, they'll also accept the same Messiah. Why? Because they've been teaching it. You see the deception there? It's sad. I wish more people could see it. They're going to be raptured, all right. They're going to be raptured right into Satan's arms. Certainly not into heaven. See, Christ is coming here. We're not going there. Okay, that's first thing. Okay. And you know what the worst part is? These Christian leaders are going to be dragging all their parishioners down with them. And how sad is that? So to understand all of this, you have to understand where most end time teachers are coming from. They believe that Christ will come again to save his people, the Jews, so they will fall right in line, and sadly, they will fall right into the pit of deception. unless they smarten up. They'll fall into deception just like the rest of the world, thinking that Antichrist is God. See, Antichrist is good. He knows what he's doing. Genesis 3, that serpent is the most subtle creature in the field, in the world, in other words. And just because he plays God by bringing fire from heaven and performing miracles, yeah, that will convince the world that he is the Messiah that Daniel prophesied. And this is why, and I'm going to finish up here. This is why Apostle John said in Revelation that once they realize that they've been deceived by the Antichrist, when the true Christ returns, they will cry for the rocks of the mountains to fall on them. This is symbolic, but you get the point. And that's how ashamed they are. And according to the Greek, their fear will be a paralyzing fear. I believe the Greek word epipotent. It's a paralyzing fear. Why? They think they're going to hell. Why? That's what they've been teaching. They've been teaching that doctrine. You take the mark of the beast, you're going to hell. And that's where they think they're headed. Revelation 6, 15 and 16. Read it. Revelation 6, 15 and 16. So I've got so much more. I wanted to talk about the temple, and maybe I can extend this one more Sunday and finish this out. But yeah, that third temple is going to usher in the Messiah, all right. It's going to usher in Antichrist. And we should know better. We should all know better that this rapture theory was drummed up by a vision in 1832 by Margaret MacDonald in England. She was tripping out, had a vision, and two preachers took it and ran with it and started spreading the news, and they were handsomely financed. Money is the love of money, not money. The love of money is the root of all evil. Well, I hope you enjoyed the lesson today. You make sure to share the gospel now with others, and you'll be blessed for it. And we'll talk next week.